Three men have been arrested for the rape of 8 women near Krugersdorp. A group of men allegedly attacked the women while they were shooting a music video. Police are investigating cases of rape and armed robbery. Police Minister Muzikayise telling the media a short time ago that the suspects are believed to be zamazamas.
Today, at about 12 midnight, we were woken up about what happened in Krugersdorp, around the dumping mines there, where the group of 22 people were doing the video music. There were 12 women and 10 men. As they were 2 hours after they've arrived, around about 5, they were attacked by 10 men on blankets and paraclavas. As they tried to run away, they shot at them. They were forced to slip down, and the other 10 similar men came, and they started to rape them. 8 women were raped. I have the names, but I'm not going to give the names here of those women. But one woman was raped by 10 men simultaneously, exchange on her. The other one was raped by 8. The other one was raped by 6. They were ranging between 19 years and 35 years. Those women that were raped. They were robbed. All of them were robbed. They took their stuff, they took their shoes, they stripped them naked. Men, those 10 men, they were left with underpants. One was taken completely, even underpants and all that kind of stuff. That's a bad situation. Those are young, most of them are young girls around Joburg. Quite a big number of them come from Alex, others from Soweto, and they're from the suburbs. Their job, looks like they are models who were just there to have this music video.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has described the life sentence handed down to Ntuthuko Shoba for the premeditated murder of Tshegofatso Pule and her unborn child as befitting, appropriate and justice for the innocent lives he took so cruelly. Shoba was implicated when convicted hitman Muzikayise Malephane turned state witness. Pule, who was 8 months pregnant, was hung from a tree in Roodepoort, west of Johannesburg, in 2020.
While Mr. Shoba and Mr. Malephane killed Miss Pule, their roles in perpetrating her murder and their conduct after it was carried out were quite different. Mr. Shoba was the driving force behind the scheme and has done nothing since Miss Pule's murder to merit the kind of leniency that Mr. Malephane received. Mr. Makabela did not identify any other factor that would justify a departure from the statutory penalty. He drew my attention to the year or so that Mr. Shoba has spent in pre-trial incarceration, but accepted that this could not on its own justify a departure from that penalty. Mr. Shoba, can you stand up, please? For all these reasons, Mr. Shoba, I am enjoined by the statute to apply the ordinary sentence for an offence of this nature. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison unless the parole authorities consider you fit for release in the fullness of time. Accordingly, on count 1 of the indictment, I sentence you to life imprisonment. You may sit down.
Lisa Vetten is research and project consultant at the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Johannesburg and joins me now. Lisa, good evening to you and welcome. I want to discuss with you a little bit later what we heard Muzikayise say a short time ago, but we'll start with sentence in this matter. How important is it in serving as a deterrent for crimes of this nature, especially given Pule's family and gender activists having called for a life sentence?
You could only have received a life sentence, as the judge was saying, in terms of the minimum sentencing legislation. When you have a premeditated murder, there can only be life. And there were no substantial compelling circumstances in this matter. Shoba never once he still in fact denies responsibility for what he did. So you can't give him anything less than life. And that must be immensely satisfying. That brings her back, at least for her family, in terms of a sense of justice. So I think the case is important in that respect. And I don't want to in any way dismiss or undermine the importance of individual cases of receiving justice. But I think the bigger question we can make is, you can see the political parties, the MPs, the enormous amount of public sympathy and interest in this particular case. And that was very important, I'm sure, for supporting the family. But there are many other hundreds, thousands of women murdered every day who don't have justice, whose families sit and wait 2 and 3 years later for toxicology reports from the police, whose dockets get lost, whose matters don't get put down for trial, who wait 6 years for trials to come to conclusion. So I think it's good to celebrate individual cases, but we must look at the system and why it is that the majority of cases don't enjoy this kind of justice, and what is it that we need to do to move beyond just the individual symbolic case and make it and have systemic impact on all cases that are reported, that they all receive this kind of justice.
Well, let's talk about the systemic impact. We'll get back to the family itself and how important it is for their grief, to have been recognized through this process. But we've got new pieces of legislation around gender-based violence. We have, statements every so often, depending on what victim has been even more brutalized in the media by law enforcement and related authorities on something must be done. It seems as if we say the same things every time, Lisa. What, in your mind, then, would be the next step in the what we need to do question?
Well, I think they're different questions. So I think because we're talking about a trial, let's focus on the criminal justice system and not talk about other questions around healthcare and prevention, for instance. So I think one of the things that has happened in the last decade, and it's very apparent if you look at the National Prosecuting Authority's annual report, you can see that over the last 10 years, and I'll talk about rape, since that was what the minister was talking about, the number of rape cases that have been put down for trial is lower now than it was 10 years ago, which means that fewer convictions are also resulting than they were 10 years ago. We can't see that as apart from the broader degradation and breakdown of the prosecuting authority, I think, over the last 10 years under Zuma. So we have to focus on we have to focus very much on rebuilding the National Prosecuting Authority, because, in these kinds of matters, they're going to pull out all the stops, they're going to put their very best on display, but we're not seeing all the other cases. And that's why I think we need to start getting those kinds of statistics on their conviction rates for these murders, not only in relation to rape, because rape is showing us that there's been a serious decline. We can see exactly the same thing in terms of prosecutions for breaches of protection orders in the matter of domestic violence. Again, there's a decline. In the last year, the Department of Justice provided statistics. There were fewer than 2,000 convictions for breaching a protection order.
Yeah.
So our courts are in serious trouble.
Again, on matters like these, as you say, so multifaceted, and each one problematic and, riven with its own complexity, it will be very hard for us to get through all of the issues. But I want to touch on what the minister said there just now with regard to, and it's just awful to have to read a story like that, Lisa, as if, you're just giving the news when you recognize the trauma and the brutality behind an attack like that. When we say, as the minister said, in his voice, that one woman was raped by 10 men, another was raped by 8 men, in a sense, we have become so desensitized to how we even talk about things like that. But that's what's happened. And you mentioned this backdrop now of the number of cases that are either being prosecuted or even, where there are convictions lower than a decade ago. What cold comfort must that be for the women in this situation tonight, this evening, who are nursing the wounds on their body and hoping for justice?
It's no comfort to them. I mean, I think, and perhaps this might sound somewhat cynical, because this has attracted a great deal of attention, you can be sure that their cases will be better dealt with than somebody who is unknown, doesn't have anyone to go on social media for them, doesn't know anybody who can go and protest outside court. So I think in this case, we'll see a great deal of effort. I mean, the minister has especially set up a press briefing in order to tell you about this. He doesn't do that for the vast majority of other rapes around whether or not there's been an arrest. So there'll be, I think, attention to this matter and a great deal of effort put into it. We also can't overlook the fact that some of those who have been arrested are foreign nationals. That feeds into our very unfortunate sentiment in some part of the country that is xenophobic. So you can be quite sure there will be strong focus on this case. But I think for many of those who are not in the public spotlight, there will be little or no counselling, not in the long term, not for their families. There will be no callbacks from detectives as to what's happening. Their cases, their DNA evidence will sit for months with backlogs. Their cases may never even get to court. The prosecutor may decide there's insufficient evidence to prosecute. So I think the challenge for all of us is, again, not to focus on the cases, only on the cases that attract public attention. It's to look at those that fall outside the spotlight, which is also a challenge to the media, to go and look for those cases and make sure that the courts are being monitored much more stringently than they are at the moment.
Lisa, hard to hear, but that's the truth, as you share with it from, you share with us from your experience. Thank you so much, Lisa Vetten there.